The call Margaux made right after Dominic told her lasted 4 hours. She sat on the bathroom floor because the bedroom felt like it belonged to someone else now. The towels were still folded the way he folded them, corners tucked in, edges even, and she couldn't look at them. So she slid down the wall between the toilet and the bathtub and called the only person she knew how to call. Sera picked up before the second ring. She said all the right things. She cried at the right moments. She said, "I can't believe this," in a voice that broke in exactly the right place. She said it well because she'd had time to practice. Margaux didn't know that yet. She wouldn't know it for another 3 weeks. But that's the thing about a betrayal that's been sitting quietly inside a friendship. It doesn't announce itself. It just waits. So let's go back, before the bathroom floor. Before the conversation that ended 15 years of friendship. We need to understand what Margaux thought she had. She thought she had Dominic. 4 years, a shared lease, a dog named after a Portuguese writer, a plan. He was the kind of man who remembered what tea she drank when she was sick and switched to decaf without being asked. She wasn't wildly in love with him, not in the breathless, unreasonable way she'd been with men who hurt her before. It was quieter than that. More like the feeling of getting into a car you trust. Settled. Going somewhere. She thought she had Sera, too. 15 years. Since the second week of university. Since they'd both shown up 40 minutes late to the same seminar and ended up sharing a bench outside because neither of them wanted to walk in and make it obvious. Sera was the person who held her hair and held her accountable and held the memory of every version of Margaux that had existed before Dominic. The kind of friend you stop counting because they've just become structural, load-bearing. What she didn't know, what she is still, in some ways, computing, is that both of those relationships were something different on the inside than what they looked like from where she was standing. Dominic told her on a Tuesday. Just came home, sat down at the kitchen table, and told her. No preamble, no lead-in. He was gay. He had known for a long time. He was sorry. He used the word sorry so many times it started to hollow out around the edges, losing its shape. She didn't yell. She didn't cry right away. She just sat across from him and looked at his face like she was trying to remember something she'd forgotten. What she was actually doing was rearranging 4 years of memory in real time. Every quiet moment she'd mistaken for peace. Every time she'd told herself this was just what love looked like when it had grown up. Flat, even, warm in a way that asked nothing of you. Every time she'd wondered if something was wrong with her, whether she was too complicated to desire, too much or not enough, or simply not the thing he wanted. It hadn't been about her at all. And somehow that was both a relief and the loneliest thing she had ever understood about herself. She called Sera from the bathroom floor because the dog was staring at her from the bedroom doorway, and she couldn't handle being looked at like that. 4 hours. Sera talked her down from the ceiling, warm, steady, present. She said everything a best friend is supposed to say. You didn't do anything wrong. You're going to be okay. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. She meant one of those 3 things. Margaux started to notice it about a week later. Nothing dramatic, just a smallness in Sera's reactions. The way she was never surprised by specific details, only by the fact that the whole thing had happened. Like she was already braced for the content of the story, and only shocked that it had finally arrived. Margaux mentioned the tea, how Dominic had always remembered her tea preference, and she'd read it as a particular kind of attention, a particular kind of love. Sera said, he was always very caring. Not that's so strange to think about now. Not, I never would have guessed, just, he was always very caring. Margaux set her mug down very carefully on the counter. She didn't say a word. She just started asking herself a completely different kind of question. Here's what you need to understand about Margaux and Sera. They were the kind of friends who had a language. Not just shared references and inside jokes. an actual private shorthand built over 15 years of being the person each other called first. When Sera's father got sick, Margaux drove 4 hours on a Wednesday night and didn't ask if she should come. When Margaux lost a job she hadn't even admitted she hated, Sera showed up with wine and a printed list of everything Margaux was good at. Because Sera knew that Margaux in crisis needed a document, not just comfort. They knew each other the way you only know someone when you've watched them fail and loved them anyway. That's the part that keeps snagging. Because what Sera did, what she chose, required knowing Margaux very well. It required understanding exactly how much it would cost her, and choosing to let the bill sit unpaid. Sera had met Dominic first. Not by much, maybe 6 weeks before Margaux did. He was a friend of a friend, the kind of person who shows up at a party already talking to everyone, easy and warm and very good at making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. Sera had introduced them. She'd actually nudged it along, texted Margaux afterward. "He asked about you, just so you know." Margaux had smiled at that text for about 3 minutes straight. She thinks about that a lot now. The text, the nudge. She doesn't know what to do with it. Whether it means Sera hadn't figured it out yet, or whether it means something more complicated than that. She keeps landing on the same possibility and then stepping back from it because it's the kind of thought that, once you let it in, changes the whole layout of everything. The first year with Dominic was the best Margaux had felt in a long time. Not fireworks. She'd already decided fireworks were a trauma response dressed up as romance. This was different. This was someone who showed up when he said he would, who got along with her friends and didn't make her feel like she had to manage him in public, who remembered small things and honored them. She told Sera once, maybe 8 months in, "I think this is what a healthy relationship actually feels like. I think I've just never had one before." Sera had hugged her, had said, "You deserve this. You really do." And she'd meant it. Margaux still believes she meant it. That's the part that doesn't resolve. Sera wasn't performing. The affection was real. The friendship was real. The care was genuine. She just made a choice alongside all of that genuine care, a quiet, sustained, daily choice. And that choice had a cost that wasn't hers to pay. If you're wondering when Sera found out, when exactly she knew, that's a question Margaux has turned over many times. She doesn't have a clean answer. What she does know is this. Sometime in the second year, maybe the third, the energy between Sera and Dominic shifted in a way Margaux clocked at the time and then filed somewhere she didn't visit often. They got careful around each other. Not distant, careful. Like two people who had agreed, without saying so, on the exact amount of space to keep. Sera stopped teasing him the way she used to. Dominic stopped being the one to suggest plans that included her. When the four of them were out, Margaux, Dominic, Sera, and whoever Sera was seeing at the time, he and Sera would sometimes end up on the same side of a conversation, and Margaux had the sensation, just briefly, of not quite being able to read it. She'd told herself it was nothing, that friendships recalibrate, that dynamics shift. She'd been right that something had shifted. She'd just misread what it was. If this story is landing somewhere in your chest right now, hit subscribe. Hanny tells the ones that don't let go of you every single week. Now stay with me, because we're just getting to the part where Margaux stops wondering and starts asking. 3 weeks after Dominic told her, a Sunday. They met at the café they'd been going to since university, the one with the sticky menus and the good almond croissants, and 15 years of conversations layered into the corner booth. Margaux ordered her usual, waited until the coffee came. Then she looked at Sera across the table and said, very evenly, "How long did you know?" Sera's hands went still around her cup. And the silence that followed, the particular shape of it, The way Sera didn't immediately say, "What do you mean?" told Margaux everything before a single word was spoken. Sera didn't say, "What do you mean?" That's the thing. That's the whole thing, right there in the first 2 seconds. Because if she genuinely hadn't understood the question, if Margaux's suspicion had been wrong, those words would have come out instantly, automatically, the way they do when you're innocent and confused and the question doesn't make sense to you yet. Instead, Sera's hands tightened around the cup, and Margaux sat very still and watched her oldest friend decide who she was going to be in this moment. "I didn't know for certain," Sera said finally. "I want you to understand that. It wasn't like he sat me down and told me." Margaux nodded, kept her face completely neutral. "But you knew." Another pause, shorter this time. "I had a feeling, a strong one, for a while." "How long is a while?" Sera looked at the table. "About 2 years." 2 years. Margaux picked up her coffee, put it back down. Did the math out loud in her head the way you do when you're trying to stay calm by giving your brain something technical to do. 2 years meant Sera had sat across from her at this same table, at this exact table, in this exact corner booth, through a lease renewal, a promotion, a health scare that turned out to be nothing but didn't feel like nothing, 2 birthday dinners, 1 argument that nearly cracked them and then didn't, and approximately 400 ordinary Tuesday check-ins. Through all of it, Sera had held this thing quietly in her hands and said nothing. 2 years is not an oversight. 2 years is a decision made every single day. "I didn't think it was my place," Sera said. She was talking faster now, leaning forward slightly, and Margaux recognized the posture. It was the one Sera used when she was arguing something she hadn't fully convinced herself of yet. "It wasn't something I knew for a fact, and if I'd said something and I'd been wrong, I could have blown up your entire relationship over a feeling I had." "And if you were right?" I kept thinking he would tell you, that he just needed more time." "He needed 2 years of my time," Margaux said, as it turned out. Sera flinched. Good. She should. Here's what Margaux was actually doing in that booth while this conversation was happening. She wasn't building a case. She was doing something much more disorienting. She was watching the architecture of 15 years rearrange itself in real time. Every memory she trusted was now asking to be looked at again from this new angle. The hug Sera gave her when she said, "I think this is what a healthy relationship feels like." The way Sera had seemed at certain moments slightly too gentle with her. The specific tenderness of someone who feels guilty and doesn't know how to put it down. She'd read it as love. And it had been love. That was the maddening part. It was love, and it was a choice made against her. And both things were true at the same time, living inside the same friendship, and she didn't have a word for that yet. When Dominic had told her he was gay, the grief had a recognizable shape. She knew what that kind of pain was. She'd lost the future she thought she was walking toward, and that hurt had a name and a direction. This was different. This pain didn't have edges. "Tell me something, because I need to know if I'm reading this right. If your best friend of 15 years knew something like this about the person you were building your life with, would you want her to tell you? Or would you rather not have known until you had to? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading them. Now stay with me, because Sera is about to say the one thing she absolutely should have kept to herself. "I also thought," Sera said, quieter now, eyes on the table, "that maybe it didn't matter. That he loved you in the way he was capable of loving you, and that you were happy." The cafe noise continued around them. Someone laughed at the counter. A chair scraped. Margaux looked at her friend. This woman she had known since they were 22 and stupid and sharing a bench outside a seminar they were too embarrassed to walk into, and felt something go very cold and very clear inside her chest. "You decided," she said. "You looked at my life and you decided for me." Sera opened her mouth. "Don't. Margaux said. Not loud, not angry, just final. Don't apologize yet. I need you to understand what you actually did before you apologize for it. Because I don't think you do. Not yet. And she was right. Because what came out next, what Sera said in the long, fragile silence that followed, was the part that actually broke it. Sera said, "He asked me not to." Margaux heard the words, processed them, set them down somewhere inside her and looked at them from a distance, the way you do when your brain needs a moment before it lets something become real. "He asked you not to," she repeated. "He came to me about a year in. He was struggling. He didn't know what he was going to do. He just needed someone to talk to, and he chose you." "Margaux, my boyfriend needed someone to talk to about being gay," Margaux said very quietly. "And the person he chose was my best friend. And you agreed to carry that for him." Sera's eyes filled. He was in pain. He was genuinely, I know he was in pain. She said it without heat. "I'm not talking about him right now. This is the moment, right here. Because up until now, up until those 4 words, there was still a version of this Margaux could have lived with. A version where Sera had a feeling she couldn't prove, where she'd been paralyzed by not knowing what to do with half information, where she'd made a bad call out of genuine uncertainty. That version still hurt, but it had a logic to it. It was something a person could do by accident, in the fog of loving 2 people at once. But this was not that. This was a conversation that had happened, a secret that had been handed over like something precious, and Sera had accepted it, wrapped her hands around it, and carried it home. For 3 years, she'd walked into rooms with Margaux and had this between them. She'd held Margaux while she cried about things that felt wrong, but that she couldn't name. She'd reassured her. She'd helped her stay. This was not an omission. This was architecture. "How many times did you talk to him about it?" Margaux asked. Sera wiped her eye. "A few times." "More than 10? A pause that was its own kind of answer. "Sera, he needed someone. It wasn't, did you ever tell him he had to tell me?" Silence. "Did you ever say to him, this is not something you get to keep from her indefinitely? Did you ever give him a timeline, an ultimatum, anything?" "I told him he needed to figure it out." "That's not the same thing." And it wasn't. It wasn't even close. Figure it out is advice you give someone about a job they're unhappy in. It's not the language of someone who understood that the clock was running on her best friend's life. Here's what Margaux was sitting with, in that corner booth, with her untouched coffee going cold. Dominic had been given a witness, someone to hold the truth with him while he decided what to do with it. Someone who absorbed the weight of the secret so he didn't have to carry it entirely alone. That witness had been Sera, and that arrangement had cost Dominic nothing and cost Margaux 3 years of decisions made without the information she was owed. She had signed a lease without that information. She had turned down a job opportunity in another city without that information because she didn't want to disrupt what she and Dominic were building. She had planned a future, quietly in her head, the way people do when they think they know what they're working with. None of it was real. Or, and this was the thought she kept returning to, the one that didn't resolve, all of it was real, just not in the way she'd understood it to be. The love was real. The tenderness was real. Dominic had genuinely cared about her in the way he was capable of caring, which was fully, which was warmly, which was just not in the specific way she'd needed him to. She knew that. She could hold that. What she couldn't hold was the idea that the person sitting across from her had known about the gap between what was real and what Margaux believed, and had made peace with it. "You were protecting him," Margaux said finally. Sera didn't deny it. For 3 years, whenever I was confused or something felt off, or I came to you with a feeling I couldn't explain, you sat with me and you helped me talk myself back into something that wasn't true. You were the reason I stayed. That's not fair. You loved him. You wanted to be there. I wanted to make an informed choice. Her voice didn't crack. She was surprised it didn't crack. That's all. I just wanted to know what I was actually choosing. Sera looked at her across the table, this woman she'd known since they were barely adults, who had been present for every significant thing, and said the last thing she should have said. I thought you were happier not knowing. Margaux picked up her bag. She didn't slam anything. She didn't raise her voice. She left enough cash on the table for both drinks. She noticed herself doing it and almost laughed. And then she stood up and looked at Sera one more time. Not with anger, with something quieter and much harder to come back from. Then she walked out. She drove around for 40 minutes before she went home, not going anywhere, just driving. The particular kind where you need your hands to be doing something so the rest of you can fall apart quietly without making it an event. The radio came on, and she turned it off, and the silence was better. She went through 3 green lights without remembering them. At some point, she pulled over outside a supermarket and sat in the car with the engine running and thought about the phrase, happier not knowing. Happier not knowing. She turned it over, looked at it from every angle, tried to find the version of that sentence that was an act of love rather than an act of management. She couldn't find it. Sera texted that night, then the next morning, then 3 times on Wednesday, each message slightly longer than the last, each one beginning with some version of, I know you need space, but, and then proceeding to take up exactly the space she'd just acknowledged Margaux needed. Margaux read them, didn't respond. Not because she was being cruel, but because she genuinely didn't know yet what she wanted to say. And she'd spent enough of her life saying things before she knew what she meant. The 4th message came on Thursday. It was longer. It started with an apology, a real one, finally, with no qualifications in the first paragraph. And then, in the second paragraph, it went somewhere else. I need you to know that I have been a good friend to you in 1,000 ways over 15 years, and I need you to be able to hold both things at once. I made a mistake. I also love you. I need to know that one mistake doesn't erase all of it. Margaux put her phone face down on the kitchen counter and made dinner. Here's what nobody tells you about a betrayal that comes from inside a long friendship. It's not the dramatic thing that breaks you. It's not the big revelation, the confrontation, the door closing. It's the inventory that comes after. The quiet, uninvited audit of every moment you thought you understood. Because now that you know there was a secret in the room, you start wondering where else it was standing. Which conversations it attended. Which times Sera comforted her with one hand and held the secret with the other, and somehow kept both upright without flinching. She'd been good at it. That was the thing Margaux kept snagging on. Sera had been very, very good at it. Which meant it hadn't been painful for her. Or, it had been painful, but not painful enough to stop. Dominic called on Friday. She almost didn't pick up. Then she did, because she realized there was something she needed to ask him directly, and she was tired of going around it. How long did Sera know? She said, instead of hello. A pause. She told you. How long? About a year in, I needed to tell someone. I was in a bad place. I picked her because I trusted her, and because I thought it was safer than telling someone in my own life. He stopped. I know that was wrong. I knew it then. Did she ever tell you to tell me? Once, he said, early on. I asked her to give me time, and she did. And after that? After that, she stopped bringing it up. Margaux stood at her kitchen window and looked at the street below and let that information settle. Sera had asked once. He'd said not yet. And she had folded that request into her pocket and carried it forward and never asked again. Not when the lease was signed, not when the job in Edinburgh came up and Margaux turned it down. Not when Margaux sat across from her and said, "I think this might be the healthiest thing I've ever had." A sentence that, now that she thought about it, Sera had met with a hug rather than words. She hadn't lied. She'd just stopped asking the question. There's something almost more devastating about that. An outright lie has a villain. This had a woman who loved her friend, found a way to love her that didn't cost her anything, and called it protection. The last thing Dominic said before they hung up was, "I'm sorry about Sera. Losing her. That's because of me. That's mine to carry." Margaux thought about that for a long time after the call ended. Because the thing was, she wasn't sure she'd lost Sera. Not entirely. Not yet. And she wasn't sure, sitting in her kitchen on a Friday night with the city going about its business outside the window, whether that made it better or worse. Whether there was a version of this where the friendship survived. Whether she even wanted there to be. She replied to Sera's message on a Sunday, 12 days after the café. She didn't draft it multiple times. She just sat down and wrote what was true, which was the only thing she knew how to do anymore. "I know you love me. I've never doubted that. But you made a decision that wasn't yours to make. Not once, but every day for 3 years. You decided what I could handle. You decided what I deserved to know about my own life. And you dressed that up as protection so you didn't have to look at what it actually was. I don't think you're a bad person. I think you did what felt manageable, and you kept doing it because stopping would have cost you something. I understand that. I just can't unknow it. I need some time. I don't know how much." She sent it, put her phone down, made tea. Here's what happened after that, and I want you to hear it clearly, because this is the part people always want to skip to the edges of, either the dramatic ending or the clean reconciliation. And the truth is messier and more human than either of those. Sera wrote back, one line, "Take whatever you need. I'll be here." And Margaux believed her. That was the strange thing. She believed Sera would wait, because Sera was genuinely capable of love, had always been, would always be. The love was never the question. The question was what love means when it shares a house with cowardice and tells itself they're the same thing. She called about the Edinburgh job. It had been 18 months since she'd turned it down. The position was long gone, of course it was, but she called the contact she'd had there, not because she expected anything, just because she needed to hear herself do it. To practice the version of herself that didn't make decisions from inside someone else's story. The contact remembered her, said something had opened up, smaller than the original role but with more room to grow into, said, "Call me back if you're serious." She said she was serious. What Margaux told me, and I want you to sit with this, is that the hardest part wasn't the anger. The anger was actually the easy part. It had a shape and a direction, and you knew what to do with it. The hardest part was the grief. Grieving Dominic was one thing. She'd had 4 years with him, real years, years that had mattered, and she got to keep the memories even though the context had changed. That grief had a form she recognized. But grieving the friendship she thought she had with Sera, grieving the 15-year version, the one where Sera would never, that was different. Because Sera was still right there, still texting, still waiting. The person she was grieving was sitting at the end of a phone line, alive, available, and not quite the person Margaux had thought she was loving all this time. You can't bury something that keeps knocking. So here's where she is now, and I'll tell you this plainly because Margaux told me plainly. She doesn't know if she and Sera come back from this. She thinks maybe they do. Slower, different, with a reckoning between them that neither of them will ever fully set down. She thinks the friendship might survive in a smaller form, stripped of the easy trust she used to carry into it without thinking. She doesn't know yet if a smaller version is worth having. She's giving herself time to find out. What she does know is this: she is not angry at herself for not knowing, for trusting, for reading warmth as honesty, and assuming the people who loved her were playing by the same rules she was. She knows some people will say she should have seen it, should have pushed harder, asked different questions, trusted her instincts sooner. She refuses to carry that. She did nothing wrong by loving people and believing they were doing the same. Her instincts, as it turned out, were right all along. She felt the gap. She just hadn't known who was standing in it. The next time someone close to you has a reaction that's slightly too calm, a silence that fits too neatly, remember Margaux. Not with suspicion, but with attention. The people who love you and still choose to protect you from the truth are out there. They're warm and they're genuine, and they'll hug you at exactly the right moment. And they'll do it while holding something that belongs to you. You're allowed to ask for it back. If this one stayed with you, the next story is one you won't see coming either. A woman who spent 8 years being everyone's favorite person, until someone finally said out loud what the room had been thinking. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'm Hanny. People always show you who they are. Wet Teddy just slows it down. I'll see you in the next one.